Couple minutes, we're going to have Paul Suellentrop of the Wichita Eagle at Kansas.com talk about the Wichita State Shockers. They're our preview today as we close down on the Missouri Valley Conference. We're getting toward the end. And we'll start that all off in a couple of minutes. Blue Jay Banner and AM 590. But right now we want to kind of break down Wichita State, as we'll have Paul on here in a minute to talk about them. As Coach Murfeld said on Saturday, they always have athletes, and they have a lot of guys that they redshirted last year, some transfers in. So you really don't know, but you can pretty much expect they're going to be in the mix. It's kind of like other schools look at Creighton. If we didn't have this team coming back, just a normal team, they'll always say, Creighton's going to be in the mix.
They're definitely going to be in the mix. Like you said, they always have the athletes, the length a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see no matter how they do overall. They're always, at least with the current makeup of this Creighton team, which is basically the makeup of last year's Creighton team, it'll be interesting to see how they fare head-to-head, just because Wichita State seems to possess some of the things that give us the most fits.
You're right. That's a good point. And, there's a couple players you kind of look to. Arupki's one of them. I mean, what kind of improvement is he?
Step. Yeah, he needs a big step.
I mean, he's certainly got the physical capabilities.
But it sounds fine because if you go on any Wichita State message board, it sounds like he's the, next coming of Garrett Stutz. So it's all good.
Okay, well,
doesn't matter.
All right.
I was perusing their message board in prep. That's how I prep.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good place to start. Start at the message board, and then work back to the factual thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
I skipped that part.
And one question I want to ask Paul is, where's the scoring going to come from?
Yeah.
Because they had a boatload of scorers these last 2 years. I mean, they had a ton of guys that could wheel off the bench. Every guy could score. It was somebody different every night. Kyles, Murray, on and on
Stutz,
and on. Yeah.
Ragland.
Yeah. I mean, it was on and on and on.
Yep.
And what's going to happen this year? Who is going to be that guy to score? Certainly, they, as you said, they have some athletes, but I'm not sure. And we haven't seen the guys that are their shooters. I mean, Cotton's a guy that's back. Williams, obviously, a very good point guard. I like him a lot. But, how are these other players going to fit in? Hall is a beast inside, but I wouldn't call him an offensive machine. He's pretty much got that inside game, and that's it.
Yeah.
And has he expanded that out?
They've got a transfer point guard, too. Am I right in that? From Oregon. He sat out last year?
Yes, Armstead.
So that'll be interesting. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who might be scoring because he was a scorer for Dana. But they've got. I like White a lot. I liked how he came on in the Valley tournament. And Aruke, I tell you, that guy's. I mean, he could be a real force in this league.
He's got the tools, no doubt. Yeah.
But I could see him finishing second. I could see him winning it. I could see him finishing sixth. I mean, it's going to depend on how these players mold. They do play a very competitive non-conference schedule. That'll help this team a lot.
What schedule looks like.
I don't have it memorized, but they generally do play a pretty. Yeah. Of the Valley teams, I would say them in Northern Iowa typically play one of the more competitive Valley schedules, non-conference schedules, and they. I know they go to a tournament. They have Southern Miss at a neutral, quote-unquote, neutral site game in Wichita. So they'll be seasoned by the time they hit the Valley play. And then, I can't wait to get the schedule out. That's what I like to look at is the Valley schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? There's always those stretches each team has was, wow, that's a tough 4-game stretch. We can get through this stretch, and that makes a big difference. Do you get off to a good start? Do you get off to a bad start? I mean, look at us last year. We lost the first game at home, which just looked like it was doomsday. Because now we got to go down to everybody was going 0-2.
Yeah.
Went down there and won.
That was the end of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that put us in a great position, of course, until we hit that 3-game losing streak. But each team has a section like that in their conference schedule that's just crucial that they go 2-2 or 3-1 against. And that's what makes or breaks champions. And so let's bring on Paul Suellentrop of the Wichita Eagle and talk to us about the Wichita Shockers for 2012-2013. It's Blue Jay Banner and AM 590 Omaha's ESPN Radio.
Did your lawn take a beating from the harsh summer weather? These guys can help. Omaha Friendly Services provides lawn aeration.
Welcome back to the show. And joining us now from the Wichita Eagle and Kansas.com, Paul Suellentrop. Hey, Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very, very good, thank you. How's summer going?
It's going great. Going great. How's everything in Omaha?
Dry.
Yeah, well, we've got some of that here, too.
Hey, Paul, let's go back to last year. The Sharks came off 2 seasons, with a lot of veterans on both teams. They did win the NIT title, which was a great accomplishment. But out of those 2 years where they had the 2 terrific teams, they only got 1 NCAA appearance, and obviously, of course, didn't win that game. I mean, is there, with so many new faces this year, is there kind of maybe a bit of, man, we kind of missed out on that opportunity over the last couple of years to have a really great run in the NCAA tournament?
I think they were certainly disappointed last year. Well, I mean, obviously they're disappointed not to make the NCAAs 2 years ago. And like you said, winning the NIT was, at least they kind of made the best out of a less than perfect situation. It was disappointing, I think, not to at least win a game in the NCAAs, last March, because I think they were certainly a team that was capable of winning, a game or two and maybe more if things broke right. So, yeah, from that standpoint, I think you can certainly, make a case that maybe they should have, or could have done more. But I also think, this is fans and the program that, they've only been to now 2 NCAA tournaments since 1988. So I think there are probably a lot of people who are, happy to win the Valley and get to the NCAA tournament. So I don't know that there was there was certainly not an overriding sense of disappointment. If that were to sum up the last 2 years, I think people would say, yeah, maybe they missed out on an opportunity in some way, but boy, they still had, 2 pretty darn good years.
Yeah, that's, yeah, it does. But, that stat you just threw out there is amazing. They've only been to 2 since '88, really.
Yeah, because when Fogler left, they went Fogler's first 2 seasons, and then Fogler left, and throughout the 90s, they were not close at all. And then Mark, they went in 2006. So, they're not in the, well, I guess what I'm saying is it's not a basketball program or, they're not taking NCAA bids for granted.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, I think that, a lot of people would just say getting to the NCAA and winning the regular season title, those were 2, accomplishments that we're not going to look down our nose at. Certainly we think this was a team that, could have, should have won a game or 2 in the NCAA tournament, and that would have been even better.
Paul, which player do you think the Shockers are going to miss most from last year's team?
Oh, I think I will say Garrett Stutz, just because, boy, he's, you just don't find 7-footers, in college basketball really, but, in the Valley in particular, where you could throw it into him and, especially his senior year, a lot of his junior year, but especially his senior year, you gave him the ball in a good position and you were pretty good shape to get a really good outcome. He was either going to score or he was going to get fouled, and he was a good free throw shooter, or he was going to make most of the time the right decision. Now, when I'm saying that, an Omaha radio station, he didn't play his best basketball against Creighton last year, so maybe Creighton fans or didn't see that Garrett Stutz all the time. But after watching him play, 120 games over his career, he was a nice asset to have in there and one that will be difficult to replace. Now, a lot of people would say Joe Ragland because he just had a fabulous senior year, and you could certainly make that argument as well.
I know that's probably what Creighton fans would say. You're right, Joe Ragland, because he gave us a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And Teray did too. I mean, he, because of his length on the wing. I mean, there's not a lot of Valley teams that could match up with him.
Yeah. Well, they've lost 10 seniors over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And those 10 seniors won a lot of games, and it will be difficult to replace them for a lot of reasons.
Just incredible. And, speaking of this year's team, I guess the first question I have is, where is the scoring going to come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they'll have to generate, a lot with defense. I think it should be a pretty good defensive team. I think Carl Hall will be an improved scorer. And then of the returners, Malcolm Armstead did not play last year, but he was in the program last year. I think he will be able to give him some offense. then it's basically going to be, a lot of guys either new to this amount of playing time or new to that role. Demetric Williams is another starter who's back, and I don't think he's ever going to be a huge scorer, but he can score. And they've got some, one of the newcomers that has kind of impressed me in just the bits and pieces I've seen this summer is a guard named Nick Wiggins, who I think is a really good shooter. But certainly that's a great question because they were just, this last year especially were a very, very efficient offensive team. And when you got all those seniors, they're just always in the right place and they're doing the right things, and it's that helps a lot.
Yeah, it just seems like the last 2 years. I think back to this team, not only inside, they have terrific players inside, but I mean even in the wings, they just ran people off the bench, and in came another guy who could drain threes, take it to the hole. I mean there was nonstop substitutions that way.
Right, and I think they'll be deep again in terms of talented guys who are legitimate Division I, legitimate Missouri Valley Conference talents, but they won't be as experienced. So therefore, I would think they would not be, maybe quite as consistent as what you saw the last year or 2 years.
You talked about Garrett Stutz not necessarily having his best games against Creighton. One guy who did kind of step up against Creighton and who I think a lot of Creighton fans were more impressed with at times was Carl Hall. Do you think he'll be a guy that the Shocks will lean on early on?
Yeah, definitely. He's going to be their most experienced inside player. And I think he's got that kind of personality. I think he's a team leader. I think he's a real, hard worker and getting guys going in the right direction kind of a guy. And, again, I've watched him some this summer, and I know he's working hard on expanding his offensive game. He really didn't score outside of, putbacks and in the lane last year. And he's trying to develop, more of a jump shot, things like that. If he can be successful, then that would really help too. So, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt he's going to start, and he's going to be a guy who's going to get the ball a lot.
We're talking with Paul Suellentrop of the Wichita Eagle. Hey, Paul, I think one of to me anyway, the most intriguing player on this team is Uribke. And how has he looked, and how much does he need to step up his game for Wichita to be a factor this year?
Well, when I think about him, I think, I would say right now he's second string center. He may be the third string center.
Really?
They've got a junior college transfer who, and again, I'm telling you stuff from pickup games and a couple practices that I watched. So who knows, that may not translate at all in October. But they've got a junior college transfer from Coffeyville who's been pretty impressive. And he may, so you think about him in those terms, I think he would be a fabulous backup center in the Missouri Valley Conference. I think a lot of schools would love to have a guy who can do what he can do just in terms of shot blocking and doing some rebounding. And if he's your third best center, then that's pretty good too. So, I think the thing that's always held him back has just been offense. Really the thing that's held him back is he's been playing behind Garrett Stutz and Carl Hall and JT Durley, some really good, experienced players. Now for him to, play 20, 25 minutes a game and average 8 to 10 points, he's got to improve his offense. He's got to improve catching the ball and, kind of maybe develop some kind of go-to move, a little hook, which is what he works on a lot. But I just don't think he's ever going to be he's not ever going to be a smooth, polished offensive player. He's going to have to get his points, a couple rebounds, put them back, those kind of things.
Well, if he is third string, that'll be fine with me because he's got a name I can't pronounce, so then I don't have to say it very often.
And he may surprise. Who knows? This is now his third year in the program, and he's certainly talented enough. But again, if you're getting 10 to 15 minutes a game out of him, and he comes in and blocks, 2 shots and alters a bunch, and then you don't have to worry about foul trouble, then that's a nice backup to have.
Well, this brings up a good point though, that we only here in Omaha we only know what we've seen. So maybe you can tell us who are some of the red shirts or the freshmen and transfers that can make the biggest impact for the Shockers this year.
Yeah, that's a great question because they've got a lot of guys who appear to be talented or look good, here and there. We don't know who will do it consistently. The guy that I really like is Cale Cotton, who was a freshman last year, and he played a good amount, really looked good early in the year, and then kind of struggled a little bit, through maybe a good chunk of the Valley season, but then kind of came on strong at the end. And I think he kind of reminds me of Darren Brooks from Southern Illinois from 4 or 5 years ago, and I think he could end up being a really nice player for them. They've got Jake White, who will also be a sophomore. He played kind of like DeKale did, probably less than DeKale did, but I think he's he really looks like a Northern Iowa guy. He looks like a player who should be at Northern Iowa.
I was going to say, Paul, that had to be one of your best lines at the Valley Tournament. You came up to me and you said, he looks like he lost his way to Cedar Falls, didn't he?
Exactly, yeah. He's from Minnesota. And looks like but he's a good shooter. He's a good rebounder, and I think he will play a lot. I tell you, the guy that a lot of people around here are really interested to see is a kid named Ron Baker, who did not play last year. He redshirted. He's kind of the star of pickup game legend and lore, and he's can be a really nice player. I don't know how much he'll play this year, being his first year, but he's a guy that I think people are really excited to see. Malcolm Armstead is the kid transfer from Oregon, and he's got a lot of Division I experience and has played pretty well at a pretty high level, so I'm sure he will be a guy who will play a lot and be pretty important.
Let's switch gears real quick here, talk just a little baseball. Came out today that Dallas Baptist has officially been added to the Valley for the 2014 season. If you had a chance at all to talk to Coach Stevenson or anyone with the baseball program down there, I know it was nearly unanimous, or I don't know about the president's votes, but I know Gene and Wichita State's AD voted for Dallas Baptist inclusion. But have you talked to anybody on what the feelings are on that?
I've talked to them a lot over the last year, so I just talked to Gene real briefly today because, I know they've made their feelings known, since the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've been totally in favor of it, and we're, alternately mystified and disturbed and disappointed that the other schools didn't see it the way, and I don't know how many schools it was. I think it was one or two that really wasn't totally on board, and I think from a Wichita State perspective, they didn't understand that at all. So they're thrilled. Not only from a baseball power ranking sense, but it's a nice road trip for Wichita State, which they don't have many of those in the Missouri Valley Conference, so they're excited about it from that standpoint. So I think it's a really good day for Valley baseball. That really makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad for their sake that it ended up like this.
Well, it's a nice job too to get into a new recruiting ground for the conference.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting. Wichita State and Missouri State, I guess, would be most poised to do that. I don't know how much, that will take effect. You're still talking about a sport with, partial scholarships and, just playing one weekend a year, every other year down there. Does that make a huge difference?
Yeah.
I don't know. It certainly can't hurt.
No.
I don't know that I expect a flood of great Texas players to all of a sudden bypass TCU and Rice and Houston and Oklahoma State to come up to, any Valley school. But, it may help. WSU's got a couple Texas kids on the roster this year, and it certainly may help.
All right, Paul, 3 questions in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Number 1, top 3 teams in the Valley this year.
I'm going Creighton 1, Wichita State 2, and Illinois State 3.
Wow, okay. Number 2, of the 4 teams in the playing game last year, Bradley, Drake, Indiana State, and SIU, the one that will finish the highest in the conference this year?
Drake.
All right. Number 3, the coach you least like to talk to after a loss, Gene Stevenson or Greg Marshall?
Ooh. Sometimes both of them can be more interesting after a loss.
I'll bet.
Just kind of depending on the circumstance and whether they feel like they've got something they want to get off their chest or they need to send a message to their team. I don't know. I guess I would say, boy, that's they both have their, I've had high points and low points with both of them after a loss. So I don't know. I guess I'd go with Greg by a slim margin, but to tell you the truth, I don't see a whole lot of difference.
That's probably just that Gene's been around so long. He's been used.
Yeah, and it's kind of different settings too.
Right.
Gene, it's more one-on-one on the field right after the game. You get him right after the game, so he has no time to cool down.
Sure.
His final out is recorded. He walks over, and pretty much within 2 or 3 minutes, he's talking. Whereas Greg, it's more in a press conference setting with television cameras, and he's had 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes even longer than that, depending on the opposing coach may talk, and then he comes in later, so he may have maybe 20 minutes or so to kind of cool down and compose himself. So they're kind of different situations from that standpoint.
Well, and
both of them are.
Baseball's a little different too because there's another game usually the next day.
Right. Although that's never been Gene's. They're
She's never had a problem with that.
They describe it as a football mentality, where every game is kind of the Super Bowl to them, and that's probably been mostly to their advantage, but maybe a little bit to their detriment at times too. Telling them there's another game tomorrow doesn't help after they've lost 5-1 to Southern Illinois or something like that.
Hey, Paul, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
We'll talk to you once the season gets.